In the autumn of 1918, the mighty German Empire collapsed. Millions of soldiers returned home not as heroes, but as defeated men carrying physical wounds, shattered dreams, and bitter memories. Across the country, factories stood silent, businesses failed, and families struggled simply to put food on the table. Inflation spiraled out of control until ordinary people carried baskets full of banknotes that were worth less than the bread they hoped to buy. The once proud nation had been reduced to humiliation, and for many Germans, the Treaty of Versailles became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. They believed their country had been punished beyond reason, forced to surrender territory, pay enormous reparations, and accept responsibility for a war that had devastated Europe. Among the countless veterans trying to rebuild their lives was a former corporal named Adolf Hitler. Before the war, he had dreamed of becoming an artist, but repeated rejection had left him frustrated and directionless. Military service gave him purpose, discipline, and identity. When Germany surrendered, he experienced the defeat not merely as the loss of a war, but as a personal betrayal. Like many others, he refused to believe that the German army had truly been beaten on the battlefield. Instead, he embraced the dangerous myth that politicians, communists, and Jews had stabbed the nation in the back. That belief became the foundation of his political mission. During the early 1920s, Hitler joined a small nationalist political organization known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, later infamous as the Nazi Party. His fiery speeches attracted growing crowds. He promised to restore Germany's pride, rebuild its military, and unite all Germans under one powerful government. Yet his ambitions moved faster than his support. In November 1923, he attempted to overthrow the Bavarian government in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The coup failed spectacularly. Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison. For many politicians, such a failure would have ended their careers. For Hitler, it became a turning point. While imprisoned, he reflected on his mistakes. Violent revolution, he concluded, would not bring him lasting power. If he wanted to rule Germany, he first had to win the minds of its people. He began writing Mein Kampf, a book outlining his political beliefs, racial ideology, and vision for Germany's future. More importantly, he realized that shaping the next generation would be far more effective than merely convincing adults. Children could be molded. Young minds could be taught to believe whatever they repeatedly heard. When Hitler was released from prison, he reorganized the Nazi Party with renewed determination. Public meetings became larger, propaganda became more sophisticated, and disciplined party organizations expanded throughout Germany. Among them stood the Sturmabteilung, or SA, the brown shirts who protected Nazi meetings and intimidated political opponents. But another organization was quietly beginning to take shape, one that seemed harmless at first glance. It was called the Hitler Youth. In its earliest years, the Hitler Youth was surprisingly small. Germany already had dozens of youth organizations. Catholic churches organized youth clubs. Protestant churches offered camps and activities. Socialist and communist parties maintained their own children's groups. Scouting organizations encouraged camping, hiking, teamwork, and outdoor adventure. The Hitler Youth appeared to be simply another youth movement competing for members. Yet it offered something many children desperately wanted: adventure, belonging, purpose. Germany in the 1920s remained a country weighed down by poverty. Many children came from families struggling to survive. Entertainment was limited, especially in rural villages. Few homes had electricity. Running water was still considered a luxury in many communities. Daily life revolved around hard work. Boys helped harvest crops. Girls assisted with household chores. Leisure time barely existed. Then came the Hitler Youth. Suddenly, children found themselves hiking through forests, camping beneath the stars, singing around bonfires, and exploring mountains with friends their own age. These outings felt magical compared to their ordinary lives. For working-class children, it was an entirely new world. Former members later recalled that joining the organization felt exciting rather than political. Many had never traveled beyond their hometowns before attending Hitler Youth camps. The organization provided uniforms, games, sporting competitions, music, and opportunities to socialize. For children whose parents could barely afford basic necessities, these experiences felt extraordinary. The uniforms themselves carried enormous psychological power. Once dressed in identical brown shirts, neckerchiefs, belts, and caps, social differences seemed to disappear. The son of a wealthy businessman stood beside the son of a factory laborer, wearing exactly the same clothing. In a society deeply divided by class, that appearance of equality created a powerful sense of unity. Many boys later admitted that simply wearing the uniform made them feel important. For the first time, they belonged somewhere. As the Nazi Party slowly gained political influence, Hitler still regarded the youth movement as secondary. Children could not vote. They could not help him seize power immediately. His attention remained focused on winning elections and weakening Germany's fragile democracy. Everything changed in the summer of 1932. That year, more than 70,000 members of the Hitler Youth gathered in Potsdam to see Hitler in person. The sheer scale of the event astonished him. Row upon row of disciplined young faces stretched across the parade grounds, cheering enthusiastically as he arrived. Standing before this enormous crowd, Hitler suddenly understood something many politicians overlooked. Adults could change their minds. Children could shape the future. According to those close to him, Hitler remarked afterward that while the older generation belonged to yesterday, these young people represented tomorrow. In them he saw the opportunity to create an entirely new Germany. Only months later, history shifted dramatically. The Great Depression had devastated economies across the world, and Germany suffered more than most. Millions were unemployed. Banks collapsed. Businesses failed. Political instability paralyzed the government. Desperate citizens searched for someone who promised certainty. Hitler offered exactly that. In January 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany. Although he had gained power legally, Hitler wasted no time dismantling democracy. Following the Reichstag fire, emergency decrees suspended civil liberties. Political opponents were arrested. Newspapers were censored. Trade unions disappeared. Opposition parties were outlawed until only the Nazi Party remained. Germany had become a dictatorship. Now Hitler possessed something he had never had before: the power of the state. He immediately turned his attention toward Germany's children. Independent youth organizations were systematically eliminated. Communist youth groups were banned outright. Socialist organizations disappeared almost overnight. Church groups found themselves increasingly restricted. Many were eventually absorbed into the expanding Hitler Youth Organization. Families suddenly discovered that nearly every extracurricular activity available to their children now passed through Nazi control. Summer camps, sports competitions, hiking clubs, music festivals, community events. The Hitler Youth dominated them all. Membership exploded. Within just a year, enrollment surged from roughly 100,000 members to more than 2 million. Yet coercion alone cannot explain that growth. The organization genuinely appealed to millions of children. Camp leaders were often only a few years older than the members themselves, making them seem more like older brothers than authority figures. Activities emphasized teamwork, exploration, athletic competitions, and outdoor survival skills. Children spent days hiking through forests, rowing boats across lakes, climbing hills, building campsites, and participating in elaborate games. Parents frequently believed their sons were simply enjoying healthy recreation. Few realized that every adventure carried a hidden lesson. Songs celebrated unquestioning loyalty. Stories praised sacrifice for the nation. Games rewarded obedience. Every activity subtly reinforced Nazi ideology. For boys especially, military themes became increasingly central. Mock battles using wooden rifles and colored armbands turned fields into imaginary battlefields. Teams planned ambushes, practiced camouflage, and celebrated victories with almost military precision. What seemed like harmless childhood games quietly prepared participants for a future far more dangerous than they could imagine. The excitement was genuine. The manipulation was invisible. The Hitler Youth was no longer simply entertaining Germany's children. It was reshaping how they thought, how they saw the world, and ultimately, whom they were willing to die for. By the mid-1930s, an entire generation was growing up under its influence. Most of its members believed they were joining the greatest youth movement in history. Very few understood they had become part of one of history's most effective systems of mass indoctrination. By the middle of the 1930s, Adolf Hitler had achieved something few dictators in history had ever accomplished. He had not only silenced political opponents and taken control of the government, but he had also begun reshaping the minds of an entire generation. The Hitler Youth was no longer simply an organization that offered camping trips and outdoor adventures. It had become one of the most powerful tools of propaganda the Third Reich possessed. The goal was no longer to entertain children. It was to transform them into loyal followers who would never question their leader. For millions of German boys and girls, everyday life became inseparable from Nazi ideology. School lessons, youth meetings, sports competitions, public celebrations, and even family conversations increasingly revolved around the same message. Germany had suffered because of its enemies. Adolf Hitler alone had rescued the nation. Every child had a sacred duty to protect the fatherland and obey the Führer without hesitation. The process was carefully designed. It did not begin with hatred. It began with pride. Children were constantly told that they were special. They belonged to a new generation that would restore Germany's greatness. While many parents still remembered hunger, unemployment, and defeat after the First World War, their children were taught that they would build a glorious future unlike anything the world had ever seen. Such praise appealed deeply to young minds searching for purpose and identity. The organization encouraged discipline in every aspect of life. Uniforms had to be spotless. Boots had to shine. Every salute had to be perfect. Members marched in neat formations through towns and cities while bands played patriotic music. Crowds gathered to watch the parades, and proud parents waved from windows as their children marched past with military precision. To many youngsters, these moments were unforgettable. They felt admired, respected, and important. Former members later admitted that the excitement was almost intoxicating. Standing shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other children, singing patriotic songs beneath fluttering Nazi banners, they experienced a powerful sense of belonging. Individual identity slowly disappeared as loyalty to the group became everything. Hitler himself understood the emotional impact of these spectacles. Whenever he addressed young audiences, he rarely spoke about complicated political issues. Instead, he appealed directly to their emotions. He praised their courage, promised them greatness, and insisted that Germany's future rested in their hands. His speeches were delivered with dramatic pauses, passionate gestures, and carefully chosen words that made listeners feel personally connected to him. Many former members later recalled that when Hitler spoke, the crowd became almost hypnotized. Every sentence was greeted with thunderous applause. To these children, he was more than a politician. He became a father figure, a national hero, and eventually an object of near religious devotion. This emotional attachment was reinforced every single day. The words "Heil Hitler" replaced traditional greetings. Teachers entered classrooms to rows of children raising their right arms in salute. Shopkeepers were greeted the same way. Public events began and ended with the Nazi salute. What initially seemed unusual gradually became second nature. Children who had never known another system accepted it as completely normal. Education also changed dramatically. Schools no longer focused solely on mathematics, literature, and science. Every subject became an opportunity to spread Nazi beliefs. History lessons glorified Germany's past while portraying the Treaty of Versailles as an unforgivable injustice. Biology classes introduced distorted racial theories, claiming that some races were naturally superior while others were dangerous or inferior. Geography emphasized Germany's supposed need for additional territory, preparing children to accept future military expansion. Perhaps the most dangerous lesson of all involved hatred. Jewish people were portrayed as enemies responsible for Germany's economic hardship, military defeat, and political instability. Communist leaders were described as destroyers of civilization. Slavic peoples, particularly Russians and Poles, were labeled as inferior races. These false ideas were repeated so often that many children accepted them without question. Songs reinforced these messages. Posters decorated classrooms. Films glorified German soldiers while demonizing supposed enemies. Even children's books contained stories portraying Jews as villains and Aryans as noble heroes. Propaganda surrounded young Germans everywhere they looked. At the same time, physical training became increasingly demanding. Camping trips evolved into military exercises. Boys learned map reading, field navigation, signaling, first aid, obstacle courses, and survival techniques. Air rifle practice introduced basic marksmanship before many advanced to real firearms. Glider training prepared future pilots for the Luftwaffe, while water exercises familiarized others with naval service. Everything pointed toward one destination: war. Most participants never realized they were being prepared for military service because the activities remained exciting. Competitions, races, simulated battles, and survival challenges felt like games rather than military instruction. The regime had discovered that children learned fastest when they believed they were simply having fun. Yet beneath the excitement lay a darker reality. Not everyone fit Hitler's vision of the perfect German youth. Children who were physically weak, shy, disabled, or unable to meet demanding athletic standards often became targets of ridicule. Leaders encouraged toughness and viewed compassion as weakness. Some boys suffered relentless bullying because they struggled during physical exercises or lacked confidence. Others were publicly humiliated before their peers. The Nazi ideal allowed little room for kindness. Those considered strong received praise. Those considered weak were expected to become stronger or simply endure humiliation. By 1936 and 1937, Hitler's control over Germany's youth was nearly complete. Independent sports clubs disappeared. Religious youth organizations faced increasing restrictions. Families found it almost impossible to keep their children outside the Hitler Youth. Eventually, membership became compulsory. Parents who refused could face heavy fines, intimidation, or even imprisonment. Nearly every German child was expected to participate. Then came September 1st, 1939. German forces crossed the Polish border. The Second World War had begun. For members of the Hitler Youth, the invasion seemed like the beginning of an exciting adventure. Years of propaganda had convinced them that Germany was surrounded by enemies determined to destroy the nation. They believed the war was defensive, necessary, and entirely justified. The early victories only strengthened that belief. Poland fell within weeks. Denmark surrendered almost immediately. Norway followed. Then came Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and finally France, which collapsed after only 6 weeks of fighting. To millions of Germans, Hitler appeared unstoppable. The children of the Hitler Youth celebrated each new victory with enthusiasm. Maps displayed in classrooms showed German armies advancing across Europe. Teachers spoke proudly of military triumphs. Young members dreamed of the day they would wear real uniforms and continue Germany's victories. Many feared only one thing: that the war might end before they were old enough to fight. But history rarely follows the plans of dictators. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union. At first, German forces advanced rapidly, capturing enormous territories. Yet the Soviet Union proved far stronger than Nazi leaders had expected. Bitter winters, enormous distances, determined resistance, and overwhelming Soviet manpower gradually slowed the German advance. Then came the catastrophe of Stalingrad. After months of brutal urban warfare, an entire German army was surrounded and forced to surrender in February 1943. It was one of the greatest military disasters in German history. Suddenly, the promise of easy victory disappeared. At the same time, Allied bombers began devastating German cities. Night after night, air raid sirens echoed across the country. Homes, schools, hospitals, churches, and factories disappeared beneath waves of bombs. Cities that had stood for centuries became fields of rubble. Members of the Hitler Youth found themselves performing duties no child should ever experience. They dug survivors from collapsed buildings, carried stretchers through burning streets, delivered emergency supplies, and searched for bodies beneath shattered homes. Many witnessed death for the first time. The heroic adventure promised by Nazi propaganda had become terrifying reality. As Germany's military losses mounted, manpower shortages became desperate. Millions of experienced soldiers had already died or been wounded. Older men and younger boys increasingly filled the ranks. The Hitler Youth became a reservoir of replacement soldiers. Teenagers barely 16 years old entered military service. Some volunteered enthusiastically after years of indoctrination. Others had little choice. Specialized units composed largely of former Hitler Youth members fought with remarkable determination, but also suffered devastating casualties. By 1945, the situation had become hopeless. The Soviet Red Army advanced from the east. American, British, and Canadian forces pushed from the west. German cities lay in ruins. Factories had been destroyed. Food was scarce. Fuel had nearly disappeared. Still, Hitler refused to surrender. In the final months of the war, boys as young as 12 and 13 were handed rifles, anti-tank weapons, and grenades. Many had received only minimal training before being sent to defend villages, bridges, and city streets against experienced Allied soldiers. Thousands never returned home. Those who survived later described feelings of confusion, fear, and betrayal. The man they had worshipped as Germany's savior had sacrificed an entire generation in a war that could no longer be won. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide inside his Berlin bunker. Only days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Third Reich had collapsed. For millions of former Hitler Youth members, the end of the war brought an emotional crisis unlike anything they had imagined. The leader they had trusted was dead. The nation they believed invincible lay destroyed. Cities were reduced to rubble, families were separated, and horrifying evidence of Nazi crimes emerged from concentration camps liberated by Allied forces. Many struggled to accept the truth. Some denied it. Others felt overwhelming shame. Still others spent decades trying to understand how they had been manipulated so completely. Historians today view the Hitler Youth as one of history's most effective systems of mass indoctrination. Rather than relying solely on fear, the Nazi regime exploited universal human desires: friendship, adventure, recognition, belonging, and purpose. Children were not born believing Nazi ideology. They were gradually taught to accept it through repetition, emotional manipulation, and social pressure until questioning became almost impossible. The tragedy of the Hitler Youth serves as a timeless warning. A dictatorship does not always begin with violence. Sometimes it begins with songs, uniforms, exciting adventures, and promises of a brighter future. When education is replaced by propaganda, when loyalty becomes more important than truth, and when children are taught to obey instead of think, an entire generation can be transformed into instruments of a destructive ideology. The story of the Hitler Youth is therefore more than a chapter of German history. It is a reminder to every generation that freedom depends not only on strong institutions, but also on critical thinking, compassion, and the courage to question those who demand absolute obedience.